Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to my Politics 2100 video cast here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling The Fundamental Political Divide, Hobbesians versus Rousseauvians in U.S. politics. So I am introducing a theme that I've thought about for about a year or so, and I wanted to, publish it here on the video channel, on my YouTube channel here, and see what people think of it, whether it resonates with people, and also it does follow from some of the topics I've been talking about. And also contemporary politics, events in current politics, quite closely, and also even the most recent video about sadomasochism in U.S. politics. So anyway, so the idea is basically that there's what I've observed over a long while, and then started to formulate as a theory or a hypothesis, is that there's an underlying there's two political philosophies sort of underlying current political divides in the United States and also in other countries, and there are very few pure forms of Rousseauvians or Hobbesians, but I think this is a fundamental polarity or disagreement in political theories, and using the fancy word philosophical anthropology. In other words, the theory of the human being that is contained within any given political political orientation or policy. So anyway, so Hobbesians, are it's named after Thomas Hobbes. He was a writer in England mostly, his origin is English, and he lived in England and France mostly during his life, and he was active and writing in the 17th century, so in the 1600s. He I think he was born in the late 16th century, so the 1500s actually. So, and he was alive during the English Civil War, which had some influence on him as well, and which was a period in which we saw the first glimmerings of a republic emerging, or an anti-monarchist or non-monarchical form of government emerging in England, and then sort of a fight between Republicans, or people who are small r Republicans, versus and you could also some degree small d Democrats versus people who were royalists in various forms. And then Rousseauvian or Rousseauvians are followers or people who are very much influenced or default to the assumptions of Jacques Rousseau, who wrote in the following century, so the 18th century. His whole life was in this we call the 1700s, and he is very influential in the for the American Revolution. Or, I mean, there's some dispute about it, but he certainly, his ideas express some of the impulses within that inspired the U.S. founders and the writers of the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, about what were fundamental human rights and what was even the nature of human beings. And so it's very important and I'm seeing these, not necessarily people who've read these writers and follow them to the letter. In other words, people. I'm not saying Rousseauvians and Hobbesians are people who are intellectual, academic people who are loyal to the thoughts of these thinkers, but more that the thinkers, these people, express a certain trend within our politics that is, independent, and you could say that one person is they're not following Hobbes, so they're wrong, or that's not my concern, and certainly I'm not the concern of many political actors today, but more that these are assumptions that underlie how people respond to political events and what political orientations they gravitate toward. So anyway, so Hobbesian. Okay, let's start with Hobbes. Hobbes, who was the earlier thinker. So Hobbes thought that people were fundamentally bad and that they needed a strong state to it. Now, let's say a Hobbesian. I don't want to attribute. I don't want to get into disputes about what Hobbes, all the different differentiations in human nature that Hobbes may have inserted in his writing, but certainly the Hobbesian that I'm talking about is someone who thinks that people need a hierarchical society where, and particularly they need a state, they need a sovereign, or the Leviathan, that there was a name of the most famous book by Hobbes was called Leviathan. And anyway, this state that was going to reduce misery that naturally occurs when people get together and are living in a society together. And so this can be a very conservative, it can be a very right wing, and Hobbesians tend toward the right wing. I'm not saying not all Hobbesians are not all people who think that society and politics is about minimizing harm, and that's really in some sense what I'm saying when I say Hobbesian. In other words, they think a Hobbesian thinks we're in trouble. Life is short, brutish, and nasty. Okay, that's another phrase that's associated with Hobbes. And so therefore, we want to preserve what we can of some form of civilization by containing basically aggression. Okay, by people's or greed, aggression, whatever it is, by containing them and by submitting to the authority of. And it could be, now this is where, Hobbes is not necessarily a Democrat at all. In fact, Hobbes is saying, the Leviathan could be a monarch, okay? So, and that is the way in which to create a peaceable order of some kind, an order that's relatively better than the alternative. And so, and the idea is that Hobbes was, and Hobbes was on the royalist side to some degree of even though at the same time he was something of an Enlightenment figure, and that he was interested in the continuing knowledge, the advancement of knowledge and of science and so forth and so on. So he wasn't entirely a reactionary, okay, but anyway, but nevertheless, however you want to characterize Hobbes the man, this Hobbesian tendency that I'm noticing is what I described. In other words, the assumption that people are fundamentally bad and need something above them to contain that badness, okay, and that life is necessarily also, things are going to go awry, not necessarily people alone, and so we need this kind of, he called Leviathan, whatever, this state that is the sovereign, okay, the sovereign that is going to help people preserve what they can of a survivable and fairly decent life, okay, of some kind. So then now Rousseau has an opposed view, okay, of human nature, that he thinks humans are inherently good, or at least, let's say, the Rousseauvian does, okay. I don't want to, summarize all the work of Jean-Jacques Rousseau here and say that it's all one thing or the other. This is not an academic dissertation or treatise on the actual views of these two now long deceased philosophers. But anyway, Rousseau thought that the concept of the noble savage is associated with Rousseau. The idea that people are inherently, in a state of nature, people are inherently good, and that he's also a philosopher of education. There's a lot of educational theory that has its basis in Rousseau, and so he thought that the way to encourage, enlightenment was to educate, and so Rousseau or Rousseauvians, let's be more specific and up to date. Rousseauvians are he was also an egalitarian, and egalitarianism, he was for the broadest and most equal society that we could achieve, and so what I'm calling the Rousseauvian tendency are people who are going to assume that people are basically good, and that we are basically cooperative with each other, and that we're going to we don't necessarily need this Leviathan, okay, or we don't need to then the sovereignty, okay, this is where, in some sense, the basis of the U.S. Constitution and the United States politics comes from a Rousseauvian view, is that it's popular sovereignty. So the sovereign or sovereigns are the people in the society itself. So they are together. The government derives its sovereignty from popular will, from, among other things, voting, okay? And so, or mostly from voting, actually. So the idea of a democratic republic then becomes conceivable if you think that sovereignty is not inherited by some special person who has some lineage, some particular genetics and parentage, but rather it comes from them being simply human beings living in the society, and therefore they should rule based via voting and via having representatives in a parliament or a Congress of some kind. So anyway, so this these two views conflict with each other in many different political issues. For instance, when you think about police reform, okay, and which is an issue that is coming up once again, in the politics of today, is that there are people who think that we need a stronger police force, and we need to never ever cut the budgets of police departments, and always be finding out that hunting up the bad guys and putting them in jail, or at least trying them using a legal system where they have some rights and so forth and so on, but still that they would be the point is to punish and to exert this the weight of the sovereign of the state, whatever the state's origin in terms of its sovereignty. Does it derive from the people, or does it derive it from simply the fact that there are people who are sitting in offices who are the powerful, okay, or the rich, or or maybe even a monarch of some kind, so there's no, what they're most concerned about is that the evil aggression that people have inside them that everybody has, or particularly sometimes Hobbesians, and this is where we get into different flavors, okay, think that it's mostly one group of people or one type of person that has this evil, and therefore the state should be sitting on that often racial group, sometimes ethnic group, or those outs, or even those foreigners, or whoever it is, and that the primary function of the state is to keep that evil, that bad stuff that comes from the people outside the nation, or people inside the nation who are considered to be not the proper people, the citizens or whomever, or the native race of the people in that country, and that therefore, and their focus is on let politics, and let's the policy that the politics is about to implement be all about control and containing and punishing and maybe even eradicating, and that can get into genocide, okay, the bad people, okay, and the people who are tending toward criminality, for instance. So, and then the Rousseauvian approach to police reform, and again, police reform has come up again because of the wave of or there were some high-profile petty crimes, and also there's some increases in certain types of crime, not a huge increase, but still there is some concerning changes and people are trying to figure out, or let's say not people, let's say there is a political dispute going on where the criminal justice reforms that were trying to be implemented over the last year or so, 2 years, are trying to be rolled back with this concern about some high-profile crimes that were committed, for instance, in the San Francisco Bay Area. But anyway, the Rousseauvian approach is the reformer approach in the sense of saying, well, let's not meet every crime with the full force of the state. Let's try to create a sort of a section off, some incidents as being mental health problems rather than simply criminal problems. That, in other words, that people are having a mental health crisis, and that's really, or a crisis of living standards. Okay, so that gets into more general ideas about, so crime is created by bad living conditions, okay, for instance, is a more Rousseauvian approach. In other words, people haven't learned and this is where the educational approach of a Rousseauvian comes in, people haven't learned to act in a civil way, in a way that's socially acceptable, because of they have some pressing needs that they can't delay, and they do impulse-based crime, and then and so they need simply either more resources or also some kind of rehabilitation, some kind of learning process where they learn to be better citizens and better people in the society. And so you see here, this is a position that's a liberal to left position with regard to criminality, but also with regard to almost every social issue and almost every government policy issue that you can think of, in that a Rousseauvian position in foreign policy is about trying to do diplomacy first, by trying to create, by trying to meet first with your adversaries potentially, and see what you can agree to that will reduce tensions, will reduce the likelihood of war, and meanwhile, a Hobbesian position, and not necessarily attributable to Thomas Hobbes, but this Hobbesian position that I'm discussing is about the bad people in other countries need to be met with full force, and we need to treat them as a danger, and the danger is coming from the outside. We don't have culpability. They have culpability. Now again, this is I'm making a cartoon of this Hobbesian position, but unfortunately, we have lots of politicians who of the right and even of the center who have this attitude toward foreign policy, toward the projection of force by the United States. This is particularly salient in the United States because we have such a powerful military and such a widespread political or military and also political influence in the world. Anyway, so the orientation of our politics with regard to threats and so forth and so on has great ramifications for people, but not only our own people, but almost more for people in other countries. So anyway, so the Hobbesian and versus Rousseauvian position can be found in, I think, almost every sector of our politics, and also, I mean, we're now facing, among other things, and this is where we're getting into the sadomasochism idea. I actually want to keep that to one side for the time being. But anyway, in the area of labor market policy, you have differing views that are one. I would consider one to be the Rousseauvian, the other one to be the Hobbesian. The Hobbesian being saying we have to get people back to work by if they're not working right now, or we have to have people work at this in certain conditions by just simply forcing them to do that, by simply saying this: we are the government and the corporations, for instance, or corporate interests are the betters, okay, of the people who are the workers or the potential workers, and they will dictate to them, what they should be doing. Now that, for instance, we think the COVID crisis is somewhat over, though we don't really know that right now, and that the moment of sort of expanding possibilities that workers saw or have been seeing in the last 2 years, they're trying to shrink down that sense of that there is a possible way that people can work for higher wages, with better working conditions, and that instead that we want to just create conditions where we simply whatever the government leaders and also or the corporate leaders together want to create conditions that will force people to accept their previous the social contract with regard to what it means to work and what it means to have a job and so forth and so on. So so this Hobbesian Rousseauvian sort of dynamic is something that you can see in. I think there are extremes in terms of both of these positions. In other words, there are radical Rousseauvians who think that there is no that the government, that there's really no legitimacy to any, for instance, policing, okay, of people, and they're police abolitionists, and this is really just this Rousseauvian, a purified form of this Rousseauvian element in our politics, and most people are not that radical or purified in their Rousseauvian view, and you have that, for instance, in the abolish the police, or at least defund the police, which to me, other people say, well, it just means partially defund, but it's like it suggests that basically that the notion is that people are inherently good and we don't need any policing, and so and therefore let's do it that way. And meanwhile, the Hobbesian position is no, no change. In fact, more. There are all these bad people that we need to punish, and we need to get them into the right places, which depends on where they are. But through harsh, either tough love or no love, basically just crime and punishment policies, just show them, okay, that this is right and this is wrong. And anyway, so I think that in reality, in terms of my orientation, is that I'm a mixture of those two things. I don't, and I think that I'm not unique in this. I think people have varying degrees of Rousseauvian versus Hobbesian, or at any given moment. In other words, people can flip from one orientation to the other. I would prefer people to be more consistent and think consistently about what their position is, and to have a position that resolves this you can call it a dialectic between the Rousseauvian versus the Hobbesian orientation. I think that it's a stale it's a stale division of what needs to be done in any society. I believe, for instance, that we always will need some kind of law enforcement. So I'm not against, in principle, the idea of having law enforcement. But again, I'm against police brutality and racist policing, and also against under-policing areas which need more policing, and so including policing white collar crime. So and all of that is a that's a mixture, I think, of a Rousseauvian and a Hobbesian view. I don't think but I think that our politics is dumbed down when we have Rousseauvian versus Hobbesian debates, okay, when we have two purified positions. One is Hobbes, not quoting Thomas Hobbes or not quoting Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but that back and forth is stale, okay, and I think that we need to just understand where using government, using the state to do certain things, the instrument of the state, and what does it do well, and what does it do less well, and how do you and what is a reasonable picture of human nature, and this is it requires some differentiation, some complexity. I see the attraction of just saying, people are good, whatever, let's do it, let's do that, or people are bad, whatever, just having a simplified view. But I think that a more nuanced position is required, really. And so I think, in terms of my view of human nature, I think humans have inherently good and cooperative and altruistic, but also aggressive and selfish and acquisitive interests and impulses, and these need to live in society. We need to channel these or modulate these, and so forth and so on. And the state can help you. In fact, without a state, you can't really do that all on your own. Okay, and so anyway, I think that what I just sketched out for you within a few seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, is a better position to start out your politics or your policy orientation. But then it's not strictly Hobbesian, it's not strictly Rousseauvian, and I see again these purified positions fighting with each other and creating a stale cycle of political arguments. And I will try in subsequent videos to draw this in to make it more concrete if this seems very abstract. But I see this happening, often, and it's something we need to get beyond, I think, to really start working on the political issues we need to be working on. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like it, and also share your thoughts on, my presentation here or these ideas. If you have been, deep in political philosophy, or just, want to start here to, put out a few ideas. And then if you're liking Politics 2100 more generally, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.